tonight, which is on education, and then we would make a transition through tertiary retention, a kind of discussion of that, to Dennis Bro, who is here to give us a short, 10 to 12 minute talk on serial TV. He's the author of The Birth of the Binge, and a very good analysis of serial TV. And he would talk about time flow and tertiary retention in television and television series, and the increasing loss of attention span. He's got a really great take on this new gimmick that comes through. Is it Spiegelberg, Dennis? The new thing, the little quibbies or whatever they call this, that you can watch the movie on the subway in 7 minutes. Or
yeah, it's Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Katzenberg, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Quibi stands for quick bites, little 7 to 10 minute bits of entertainment, which is all the working class really deserves, after all. So
okay, right, gotcha. Okay, so anyway, yeah. So and I'm waiting on Arto and a friend Eugene and a couple of other people, but I'm going to go ahead and begin. So so that's kind of tonight. Any questions or thoughts, afterthoughts? I mean, I put up some of my own, just basically some of the motifs we engaged last week. Again, to me, it's crucial to begin with Stiegler in terms of his ontology through the notion of technics as time, right? And think about these 3 myths that I presented. The myth of course, Prometheus, which is still the myth we live under, the Faustian bargain, that we can master anything, that we are masters of the universe. It is a Cartesian model that still is with us. It still informs medicine, most research, and something we're still with. And as I mentioned, Marx dedicated his dissertation on Democritus and Epicurus's differing theories of nature to Prometheus as the patron saint, the one who steals the fire for the gods, and then of course is punished for stealing that. And of course Marx, as we know, is put in exile in many countries for daring to share the secrets of the capitalists, right? And giving us a new language to understand that by and therein. So I think that's certainly one myth that we live under, and this would be the epistemic in Stiegler's thing. It was a kind of active overcoming, an active part of the dialectic, whereas the Epimethean, his brother, is this originary default, which is part of, I would think, a passive dialectic. And until we encounter that passive dialectic, we're always going to be kind of obsessed with our ability to master and to dominate, and we really lose in this moment any kind of real processes in Stieglerian terms, processes of individuation and building on possibilities. And I think this is very, very true in some ways. And then the third one, of course, was Sisyphus as a kind of active stoicism, that it seems to me that's where we are. We're always going back to the drawing board. But in that going back to the drawing board, if we look at Stiegler later, there's this movement between enchantment and disenchantment that also speaks to his work, and we'll get to that when we get to symbolic misery. But this is another thing that he speaks about, the newness that technics and an encounter with technics can give us. So I kind of thought of these myths as a narrative structure, that we could, start from again. And then, of course, this crucial distinction between knowing and craft, and the difference between the sophistical approach through techne, to that of philosophy in terms of the grounding for new languages, the grounding for new knowledge productions. So anyway, I throw it open to you just for a second to talk about that. I also mentioned, I'm sorry, I'll go just one second, the film the Ister, which is worth seeing. This is based on the 1804 poem of Hölderlin, in which Bernard Stiegler is one of 4 commentators on it, and Stiegler has a kind of thinking about techniques vis-a-vis technology and the use of hydroelectric plants. And this is the famous quote of Heidegger that big agriculture is as bad as the nuclear bomb and as bad as the camps. I'm not so sure about that, but Heidegger did make that statement about agriculture and the agricultural combines and where it was going, this kind of totalitarian, totalizing approach to, the rape of the land and the use of this. So anyway, so I throw it open to you before we go on and look at this social pathology of everyday of May of '68 and the aftermath. So anybody want to say anything or?
I just had a question.
Yeah.
Where can we find Ister, this film? Is it on?
I think it's on YouTube. The director is Daniel Ross. He's one of two directors. I think her name. I forgot her name. I think it's Darby. But Daniel Ross is the chief interlocutor and filmmaker with Stiegler in the English-speaking world. In the Anglophone world, he is the person. Daniel Ross is his name, and it's really worth watching because it's kind of the film essay. The film as essay in some ways, and it's filled with commentary. So you have Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe, who is now deceased, but was a major Derridian professor at Berkeley for a while before being in Strasbourg. Jean-Luc Nancy, his good friend, close friend, they also had the school at Strasbourg, is in this, and the filmmaker Hans-Jürgen Zederberg, who did Our Hitler. And Bernard Stiegler, and the film sort of ends with a recitation of the poem by Heidegger himself, based on his 1942 lecture. And interestingly enough, Heidegger goes back to Hölderlin 1935 is his first course on Hölderlin, 2 years into the regime, and then 42 when he's pretty much, finished with the regime. And if you know German somewhat, you can see the subversion of the dominant codes of, fascist, Third Reich language, for those of you interested in that kind of thing. So he goes back to Hölderlin as kind of the founder of the German nation. And maybe some of you know Hölderlin goes mad, supposedly while translating Antigone and the question of what is man. And that's a lot has been made of this great, passage in the play, the ancient play Antigone. So so I'm pretty sure it's available, and I can do some searching if you can't find it and probably get it. Yeah. It's been playing. I saw it first in Concordia University. Ross actually presented it there in Montreal in 2005, I think, or '6. It first screened in Rotterdam, I think, was the first showing of it. So certainly worth it, as a film essay with philosophical commentary. Good.
Michael, there's something called www.fandor.com, which is a website which has independent films, and you can click on that and you can go watch it there. I think I posted.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah. Okay. So our friend from Paris has the right information, so we're good. Okay, good. Okay, anybody else? Some other thoughts or questions going forward?
I was just wondering about.
It
might be, premature for tonight. You might want to address it later, but if you could clarify what Stiegler means when he uses the term tertiary retentions, which assumes there are secondary and primary retentions, and what exactly, I sort of have some notion of what he's referring to, but I want to be sure. And then the other was how he's using the term pharmacology and Farmicon.
Right.
I have some concept of it, but I could be off in terms of how I am reading those two terms. So if you could just clarify that.
Okay, well, maybe you could begin with your understanding and maybe I can fill it in if you want. I mean,
Is it right to say that tertiary retentions relates to either technological systems that are computational or sort of memory machines and sort of storage of information technologies? Is that what it is? Or is it something more psychological or sort of intrapsychic?
I think it's both. And I mean, Dennis is going to address this because that's one of his points of departure later today. But as you did last week, you anticipate where we're going very well. And the tertiary really is much more concerned, and we'll go back to this too in maybe a deeper way, but it really refers to cultural memory and the exteriorization of memory, and what goes into what Stiegler points out in the second volume entitled Disorientation of Technics and Time, as the industrialization of memory. So it's a very, and as you say, technological systems may be one way of looking at it, but it's deeper than that. It's a kind of almost reservoir or warehouse of techniques that we have, right? Shaping us all the time, right? So this is really the tertiary retention at work. Dennis, do you want to add to this, and then we'll go back unless you want to just wait until you do your thing, or maybe this is, yeah.
I think that's clear, but the primary from Husserl is just sort of sense experience, what's sort of coming at you. Secondary is memory, how that sense experience is interpreted. Stiegler gives the example of primary and secondary as sort of like the note versus the melody. So the single note versus the melody, the incorporation of that. And then tertiary are all those memories outside of us,
yeah,
cultural. And now there's sort of media memories that have that sort of to sort of make who we are or remake who we are, really, but which are not us.
Does that help? I mean,
Yeah,
I think
it does,
the
yeah.
primary retention is what we're actually. Husserl speaks about protension, the future that we're projecting, right? It's a protensional activity, and the retentional is our short-term memory in that context. So within all of those structures, we have this intention towards the objects, right? We have an intention directed towards an object domain, right? And that's very primary in terms of the suspension, if you will, which is the phenomenological reduction of any natural standpoint. So we can see clearer the object in front of us. The secondary then becomes part of that memory going to the next level of the reduction, right? So Stiegler adds to this the tertiary, that becomes, again, as Dennis was saying, this everything that is, been stored, if you will, the great storehouse, if you will, of memories. And there's a series at Stanford that is very puts this pretty aptly, I think, called Cultural Memory in the Present. And in a way, this is a kind of interesting phrase to use, for this tertiary retention. But as Dennis pointed out, now there's the mediatic, and this notion of note and melody, and then getting to the tertiary. As I mentioned again, to refer back to last week, Stiegler does a very interesting approach to Charlie Parker listening to Lester Young playing on the phonograph, and how he retains notes, right, melody, and then goes beyond, right, and how this becomes incorporated in the little carrying of the 45 phonograph that he used to do in between early gigs, after starting off in St. Louis, before the bird came to the New York, area, and Toronto, et cetera, and became the legend that he was. So that's another example. And I think the musical is a very good, music is a very good usage here too, of the retention of note and melody. If you're really interested in this, aesthetically speaking, there is a philosopher named Philippe Merlin who has written on this extensively, Phenomenology and Music. And he's very, very good at this in terms of primary, secondary, whereas tertiary is really, again, Stiegler's, own conception, in a way. It's kind of the materiality. Go ahead, Dennis. Yeah.
Just one thing, just in terms of, if you take his analogy, let's say the analogy, the note versus the melody, the note incorporated into the melody, is the memory, but then tertiary attention in that analogy would be the pop song, which ingrains itself on your mind. And I think his line about the pop song is, we knew them when we first heard them in the way we already did. That's what he wants to talk about in terms of, how this kind of works in terms of your consciousness.
Yeah.
And I mean, our friend Arto is here, who's a big fan of Sun Ra. So Sun Ra disrupts a lot of this in terms of note and melody through the new use of chords and, et cetera. And a lot of the experimental jazz. I'm a real jazz aficionado, so a lot of the experimental work in jazz was a way of upsetting that and not letting it become pop in a certain way. And this was the notion of an avant-garde. And of course, you could read this in Schoenberg, Webern, and Berg, vis-a-vis atonal systems as well. So anyway, we can go back to this. Going to your question again about the pharmacon, you don't ask easy questions. Again, the pharmacon is a very rich concept. In terms of his political economy, instead of talking about the destruction of capital, right? And not really using terms such as socialism or communism, of the future. He'll use as alternatives the associated milieu, the economy of contributions, and these kind of things. And this goes back to his notion of where we are is in the pharmacology of capital, right? In a sense, the capital within it somehow holds both the poison and the remedy. It's the execution that is at stake in many ways for Stiegler. He is not, quote unquote, a Leninist, a Trotsky, a Fourth Internationalist, nor a Badiouian style post-Althusserian communist. There's no question in my mind about this. He thinks that we're at a stage that we really have, and this is part of the reading today about the new political civil society on the international level. So the pharmacon and the pharmacology of capital, that there is somehow in this retentional economy of the poison, there is also contained within the remedy. And his notion of the pharmacon, I think, is very close again. And I go back to Heidegger and to Derrida in this case, that the greatest danger may have the saving power. Once it's revealed to us, we then begin to see this redemptive or saving power. Very much again like the messianic concept of history with Walter Benjamin, in a sense. So, but we can go back to this. I mean,
Yeah.
it's more layered in a way. I know Richard, whose photo is off. Maybe he's out of the room. But anyway,
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Good. Could you you mentioned to me the Pharmacos as the actual Pharmacos himself, right? Or the figure of the Pharmacos.
Right.
Yeah,
There's another word in Greek, pharmakos, with the accent placed differently, but it's interesting. It means scapegoat.
yeah.
And so I've always been interested in these two words as cognates of Pharmacos and Farmicon, as the scapegoat, as something which is expelled from the city, and which brings a kind of healing, and then its relation to tragedy. Tragedy being, by one definition, by one etymology, the song of the goat, and then a reading, like Antigone and such, but a reading of it, which in my washing machine haze here, I'm not really doing very well with.
All right, it's okay. The Dionysian origin of tragedy you're referring to, the goat dance itself, and
Yes.
the sacrifice and the scapegoat.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, it's interesting in terms of Freud's use of the Oedipus and the place of theater and in the polis and of these characters. In 5th century Athens, of course, all the stories are about 9th century. They're all Homeric characters with these greater freedoms, you could say, a greater liberty of movement, which the 5th century both the citizens of the 5th century both admire and fear in a way. This Greek word, the word in the Antigone, the fifth, nothing is Dana, like in dinosaur. Nothing is more wonderful or terrible. It really means both those things than a human being.
Right.
And so, something about this quality of these characters and how the city, kind of addresses or tries to ground these figures.
Okay, I was just going to add that, I mean, the interesting thing again, vis-a-vis Stiegler, if you think of tertiary retention, we live in an era where, we see tragedies every day, but somehow we deny it, right? In a lot of ways. We're in a kind of, George Steiner wrote a book, The Death of Tragedy.
Right.
And, no longer do we really experience the fullness of that we very much hurry in the quote, remedy and avoid the poison, if you will, of the tragedy. And this is another, a problem that we have today. And I think that Stiegler is trying to, use this again in terms of this cultural memory too, and this dialogue that he has with the Greeks and trying to bring it to the foreground. Dennis, you wanted to say something to this too?
Yeah, just a couple of other instances of this kind of thinking. The pharmacology, it's pharmacological is from Derrida, sort of Stiegler's mentor.
Right.
And you could think of the Nietzschean thing: what does not kill you makes you stronger. Only the Stieglerian thing would be, well, it could kill you or it could make you stronger. That's to be determined, kind of. And I think also there's a Chinese saying, which is Wuji, which contains a double meaning of danger and opportunity. So it could, it could be both. It is both danger and opportunity.
Yeah, it's like Mao used to say, there's great chaos under the horizon. Good day for a revolution. Right.
And
in a way, yeah. So.
And the German gift, which is
it's gift, yeah.
Right, like a gift,
yeah.
And then a poison.
Right. And that's the beginning of phenomenology, both for Husserl and Heidegger. The S gift is the gift that gives, but it can be both the gift of poison and the gift of the remedy together. So we have the gift as well as part of, this culture that they're dealing with. That's what Dennis was referring to in terms of primary retention as part of the sense experience.
Yeah, and also going back to the Phaedrus of or also the Derrida and the idea of writing, which is supposed to come afterwards and is a loss, but he's constantly finding that in fact it precedes the way that writing, the dangerous supplement, and I get a sense that Stiegler's also reconfiguring that along this way of the techniques, that it's both something we need to fear but also embrace and find ways of using in a way that's really going to get us out of the hole we've dug for ourselves.
Okay. I'm just going to refer, and I'll put it in the chat as well, the book For a New Critique of Political Economy, another one of his interventions, and this was a group of lectures he gave. He has a whole section called The Pharmacology of Capital,
right,
which he takes on surplus value as well, and tries to show surplus value as another way of looking at profit. And he takes his point of departure for Jean-Francois Lyotard, who says there is no such thing as use value anymore, only exchange value that he extracts from the postmodern condition. So this is a very important aspect of his political economy as he goes forward. Yeah. So and going back to the Phaedrus, I mean, again, the influences are so rich here I mean, he has read very carefully not only Plato's dialogue with Phaedrus, but he's read very carefully Derrida's, essay on the Pharmacon, right, which is taken and translated in Dissemination. And the Pharmacon is really something that Plato may have been afraid of, he who writes, right? That somehow the great philosopher muffles his ears of who he who writes, and this becomes the privileging of the oral subject or the speaking subject in the history of Western metaphysics that excludes grammatization or grammatology in Derrida's sense, or the written for Stiegler as grammatization. It's the writing of techniques that's important. We no longer have ages, if you will, of epochal shifts in ontology, but we have ages of grammatization, right? How this, and this is one way of understanding where we are. So he takes the Derridian notion of grammatology and begins to use it temporally, historicizes it in such a way that we begin to read in terms of, what was really going on in that period, gesture, speech, the written, etc. And how do we reinscribe this, and how is it inscribed to us in a certain way? Instead of Heidegger, that we are beings through which being passes, we're vessels, right? We are actually inscripted subjects, right? Through the technics, through the thought of Epimetheus. And this is it, we're being written in some ways. We write, but we're really being written, if that makes some sense to you in terms of this exteriorization. So, yeah. So I hope, yeah. Okay, go ahead, please.
No, that all I think resonates. I had been thinking that maybe Pharmacon might relate, but to like Foucault's notion of the episteme, the sort of regime of knowledge, or the kind of thought structure, sedimentation of knowledge with which we inherit and within which we live, some of which we're not conscious of or aware of, but it is a sort of a knowledge structure that can extend, therefore, to production and consumption in which we live and exist, which can both be, gift and curse, or cure and poison kind of thing.
Right. Well, I mean, just the Foucaultian episteme, which is different than paradigm shifts, right? In Foucault, epistemes are knowledge structures, knowledge formations in which there's a production of what he calls discursive regularities. And in these discursive regularities, we begin to see how an epoch is written, in a sense, right? What becomes the regulated principles of that epoch in a way. So he's able to read the letters du cachet, around mental illness in the time of de Sade, right, if you will, and in the French scene, or he's able to read documents of madness, in the work on the history of madness. Same things with the care of the self, the uses of pleasure, to read Greek, practices, dietary practices among homosexual culture. So he's got these levels of discursive regularities. I think Stiegler is dealing with a different kind of framework because he's really looking at, again, how we're inscribed during this period. I mean, I'm not saying that they're so far apart, but I think it's important to keep some of this, kind of its philosophy being a kind of still a little bit of a science of distinctions and making differences. Yeah, Dennis. Yeah.
Yeah, and also when you think of a main epical shift for Stiegler would be from the analog to the digital.
Yes.
So that's a different way of thinking of an epical shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what that does to memory.
Right.
What the fact of recording does to memory is a really major concern.
I mean, again, I don't know about the level of where people want, but again, a great book that actually privileges still the analog in the age of digitalization, or the early age of digitalization, is Anthony Wilden's great book, System and Structure, Essays in Communication and Exchange. And he makes a real case for analogical thinking. And of course, this is in Plato too, and ananemesis, the mnemotechnics that we will talk about when we get to Dennis's presentation, is very, very important here. The analogical, very, very important. I don't think Stiegler has the interesting thing about me about Stiegler, he's not nostalgic. He's not Luddite. He's not lost in a kind of 19th century, again, we're facing this massive industrialization. He sees the moment. He's unflinching in that regard. Whether or not his alternatives, where we'll go partially tonight through education, is reasonable and something we would like to, take into our own practices, is another question. But he is unflinching. He's not recoiling from where we are. He sees it, right? He sees it, and again, he sees this kind of social engineering. He sees this, almost genome engineering through technology, and he uses Google. He has papers. I think I have something by Evgeny Motorov is his name, Arto, the cyber theorist. Yeah, he talks about this kind of use of linguistic capital now that is putting us in the position where all the knowledge is just data, and it's recycling data. This is the way the medical and the principal actor in our capitalist moment now is the insurance companies. It's all about insurance, right? Linked to the medical, to quote unquote the pharmacon. So this is interesting in a way that, and some people have written about this, and but it's not part of our everyday left speech or whatever. We were still kind of thinking about the old Trotsky-Stalin debates instead of taking the great leap forward in some ways, even though a lot of that stuff can be relevant at certain times. So anyway, any other thoughts from last week? Because we can, I want to go into this just a little bit, this lost spirit. I know I kind of put you at a disadvantage by not giving you the the Boltanski Chiapello book, but I think he engages it pretty well here. And maybe I could ask you again, did you see anything here that was troublesome, or you think it needs explanation? I mean, obviously, sublimation is a crucial concept for him. We have lost those processes. That's part of proletariatization, is we have lost the capacity somewhat for sublimation. We are on this not only repressive desublimation in Marcuse's sense, but we've been proletariatized to the point of we no longer are really able to actively sublimate, and this is another aspect of his critique, and he sees this moment of the artistic critique as a way of trying to take this back, but it doesn't really happen. It doesn't really happen for him. And again, his spirit of capitalism is much more based, if you will, on Weber than this new spirit. He doesn't think that this new spirit is really a valuable spirit, in a sense, this Geist community. So I ask you, any questions about this, or any thoughts, or I know that Will, who is here, we have this whole section at the end on the support and relations of production. He has a whole thing on phylogenesis, right, in the matters of memory, and what he tries to do with support Traeger and the decadence of the industrial vis-a-vis a rereading, if you will, of the analytic of the forces and relations of production. I mean, I'll cite it. It's on page 38. He goes on. This analysis is both an extension of Marx's thought and a departure from it. And this is on page 38. For if the relations of production must be analyzed on their own terms, those precisely of capital, such analyses are only really effective to the extent that they account for the dynamic that characterizes the beginning or the becoming of the means of production, of which the evolution of relations of production is the translation at the level of social organization, but which itself requires a general theory that can be reduced neither to the thought of capital nor to a general theory of the relations of production. Now, this is both what Marx calls for, specifically in Capital, when he states the need to elaborate a theory of technical evolution, just as Darwin theorized the evolution of living things, and for what he cannot think, to the extent that he always, in the end, thinks technics as a means. So Marx, according to Stiegler, is still thinking of technics as instrumentum, right, in a lot of ways. So technics, as far as I argued, above all, a matter of memory. It is the fact of epiphylogenesis. And within this fact, especially since the Neolithic age, the epiphylogenic becomes hyponymics, epiphylogenesis as the support of tertiary retention in general becomes mnemotechnic, strictly speaking, when the process of grammatization arises as such, that is, a process of the discretization of flows. And this may lead to what you're going to talk about a little bit, Dennis, later. This is why, rather than the means of production, it is better to refer to supports of production. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but this is a rethinking, if you will, of Marx's, distinction in Capital between relations and forces of production. And such supports form milieus. In philosophy, the question of the support is primary, and it appears as the question of the hypokemion proton. This is the first underlying subject, which can be translated as primary support. Hypokemion is a term that's used, the under subject, if you will, or you could say primary support, as this translator has done here. Or substance, that is subject substance, which in Aristotelian Greek becomes ousia, substance, right? It then becomes the question of the subject, right, first, the subject of the statement in its relation to predicates, or in other words, the logical subject. So you can see Stiegler is very much in terms of the linguistic codes here, and he very, very good at doing this subject-object linguistically. Then the subject of enunciation, that is a mere physico-psychological subject, and has the origin of modern ontology conceived as mathesis universalis. When this becomes the subject of history, work or labor, and this is crucial, emerges as the agent of transformation, and the question of technics, page 39, as the condition of all work emerges along with it. But the subject of work then proves also, and more profoundly, to be the subject of desire. That is, of the unconscious. And this was so up until the point that the commodity, as the fruit, and the conjunction of work and desire proved to be the operator of a process of desubjectification, what Marxism referred to as the process of alienation. What remains unthought, however, is technics, insofar it is the condition of the constitution of desire itself, and not just the conjunction of desire and work. So here he's taking on, again, the old attempt to synthesize Marx and Freud, or to raise the question again of desire and alienation, or the alienation of the subject. So I think this is a very rich section in terms of maybe some of the new insights he may have, or they might be old insights that Marx had, and we're not reading Marx carefully enough, and we need to reread. But that's up for examination. And any thoughts about this? I think this is a very crucial passage, going on 30, 38, 39 till the end. I think I mentioned this last week. And this is very, very important, because this is what he's really trying to do, to talk about that these books, on capitalism, even on disaster capitalism, although he'll use that term in States of Shock, and he actually takes his terminology in the reading for today from Naomi Klein, The Shock Doctrine, which of course came from the Chicago boys, Milton Friedman. Stiegler still is trying to rewrite Marx. Yes, Beryl, did you have a question? Yeah. I saw your screen go up. Did you? Yeah? No?
Nope.
Oh, okay. I see these little Leibnizian frameworks going on. Okay. So any thought? I know it's a dense passage, but what about this substitution for relations of production as support? Any thoughts about this? I mean, I think this is something worth thinking about. You know, it is a great, does it lead to a greater understanding, this language? This is I think a question we should ask. Yeah. You know, is this new language, this new conceptualization relevant to our times? You know, how do we get through this? You know, in a sense. Yeah, yeah. And is the whole question of techniques again related to desire? You know, in both the psychoanalytic sense and in the Hegelian sense as well, of course. Yeah.
At a calmer moment, I wanted to compare. You know, there's Todd McGowan, teaches up in Vermont and is a film theorist and writes on Joan Kopchak and on Lacan and the misunderstanding of Lacan
Right.
in early film theory, and about the screen being a mirror rather than the other way around, the mirror being a screen in relation to objet petit a. And he has this whole thing about how capitalism, you know, makes you think that you're going to, you know, when you get that Coca-Cola, you're going to get, you know, Coke is the thing. What was the and
The real thing, the
The
real
real
thing.
thing.
Yeah.
and that in fact the real thing is only constituted through loss. You know, the objet petit a, the death drive, repetition, you know, because of trauma and its relation to jouissance. So he kind of sees capitalism as losing, as completely obscuring that, and that's how he connects capitalism to desire. You know, that desire is actually, you know, the engine of desire is not having it. It's never. It's you. In fact, you never get it, and that this is the complete anathema. We have complete antithesis to capitalism and the death drive. So, you know, I wanted to really think about this. I haven't had time, but how it then relates to, you know, relates to Stiegler's notion, which is very attractive, that, you know, in 68, you have these theorists that kind of say, throw off your chains. And, you know, kind of capitalism kind of, at least my understanding of it is kind of says, yeah, throw off your chains. And kind of is able to reappropriate this. This is the desublimation. So you lose really a certain position of resistance or capacity of resistance by the loss of sublimation, which seems to me, you know, a different way of looking at this relationship of capitalism to desire, to psychoanalysis, and you know, I think it would be interesting, or I'm interested in trying to think through how these are either compatible with each other, these different critiques, ways of looking at it, or in fact, you know, are not. But
Well, the two critiques he's putting into question, once again, to again repeat from last week, are the social critique, which is the demand for equality, that Boltanski and Chiapello, excuse me, have operative throughout their work, right? And the other is the artistic critique, which is this demand that you are pointing to right now, that McGowan and maybe others are critiquing as well, this demand for liberation and authenticity. And in a way, Stiegler is going around both of this, right? He wants to, you know, speak to this in terms of these are categories of which management, right, a la Peter Drucker and other management theorists, and of course the advertising industry, were all too good at, you know, being able to incorporate, right, and assimilate and use, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we're going to see how much of Black Lives Matter. We already see these campaigns going on I mean, it's kind of interesting in the, I mean, I'll use sports as an example. The NBA, it's the big stars who want to play in the bubble because it's good for them. But a lot of the other basketball players are not so interested in going back to work and possibly contacting COVID, right? In some ways. So it's kind of interesting to see this at work, in our own society today, and how this management is taking over almost everything. It's LeBron James's league. It's the owners' league, but it's also LeBron James as the spokesperson, post Michael Jordan now for this, and they can sing the songs of Black Lives Matter, etc. You can take a knee on the football field now, and Arto, can't stand that. You're kneeling for what, in a sense, because that has all kinds of submissive and servile, connotations. But anyway, I think this is the interesting thing he's doing here. He's critiquing these two new spirits, right, that Boltanski and Chiapello put out there as something that doesn't allow us really to go back to analogical, and it's kind of almost preparatory for positivistic, digitalization. Yeah, Dennis, please. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add a little thing to your sports analogy. Netflix is now doing a 6-part series on the guy who took the knee. What's his name? The football player.
Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah, on Colin Kaepernick. So Colin Kaepernick is now on Netflix. They're going to do a fiction series on it, and which I think sort of relates to is one of the points here, which is that capitalism was able to absorb the artistic critique of the 60s. I prefer to think it that way rather than that the 60s were wrong, but capitalism was able not only to absorb it, but also to profit from it. And it
profit from it, yeah.
Part of something that really at this epoch, the system really worked with. And it started to incorporate that element of desire, and it became a profit center, and that's what happened. That's what you saw, a lot in music in the 70s, in 80s. I mean, particularly in the 80s, that kind of stuff. You saw this sort of incorporation, and that I think that's something of what he's talking about too.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the incessant commodification of everything that came out of the 60s right away. Yes, of course. But I mean, he's also talking about this new spirit from the 60s, which was part of that artistic critique that became highly decentralized, new form of network capitalism too, that kind of paved the way for what we're experiencing today with the Facebook, obviously here's Zoom economy, if you will, right? I mean, that he's very much aware of this, and also how job, security, contingency, outsourcing all became part of the new managerial culture that came out of this as well. This third wave, or this, what he calls the third spirit. The first spirit, not what Stiegler calls, but what Chiapello and Boltanski called the third spirit, after that of the bourgeois entrepreneur, and then, of course, the bureaucratic centralization, state regulation, i.e. New Deal. So in some ways he's looking at these three levels that they're going on and saying that this analysis is really not enough to talk about us, as products of technic, right? And how we're inscribed in this in many ways, so this is where he's going. And he also sees them as feeding a kind of managerial, attempt, if you will, intentionality in terms of control, a new kind of system of control, and we see this in, the art galleries, the privileging of the artist as, the new hero, the new artist. You can see this with, what's his name, Basquiat, how this guy was promoted in downtown, and etc. How this started to work, the stable of artists at the Paula Cooper house, or the Leo Castelli house, etc., etc. So this, to me, becomes very interesting when you begin to think of it this way, and how it, was capitalized upon, and secondly, what's lost in translation. I have nothing against people making good money or making a great living out of their craft, but the problem is what effects has it had, on the system. Yeah, Dennis, you want to? Yeah.
If you saw the article in the Times today, Netflix has a new black section now in which they're sort of absorbing Black Lives Matter, and they're retransmitting it back to us as something else that they can use. So they're engaged in that process that he's talking about.
Right.
Yes.
They're engaged in using and manufacturing artistic critique.
Yes. Yes.
And
exactly.
And you know, the way that there's a book by Laura Mulvey, Death 24 Times a Second, you know, and she's talking basically about the difference between film and video, the difference between the day when, you know, we would run around because there was a screening of The Shining, you know, at Film Forum, and we'd run down to see it. And now, you know, you have it all on video. You know, if you like particularly the scene of the boy, you know, on his tricycle going down over the rug, and then you watch that over and over again. And same with YouTube and this, you know, Black Lives Matter, the way that this, you know, Netflix can really pick up on this kind of Andy Warhol that you know, they're instant classics. These moments have become instantly commodities, and they can then turn out these products very quickly and capture the way in which, you know, the moment, you know, the yesterday's become a classic, or the possibility of, you know, of commodifying the just past while it's still hot, you know.
I don't know if he's still here, but great phrase from John. You know, manufactured dissent and manufactured violence. That's a great phrase to kind of very appropriate for here. You know, how does this become, you know, a new kind of manufacturing, or again, you know, how does it become, in Stiegler's case, supports in production, you know, in terms of reproducing this tertiary memory for our time. You know, I think this is another thing. And what Capital seems to do, and where he's going, I think, in this critique, is that Capital is capable of liquidating sublimation. This is really what's going on, is an execution, if you will, of sublimation. It's much worse than repressive desublimation. It's an outright liquidation of this, right? That people can't work, you know, they can't do things. Yes, please, yeah. And again, the co-optation, very good point too, that John put on the chat, of the co-optation of the avant-garde. Yeah, and we have no avant-garde. That's part of the problem. I mean, I think, you know, people like Peter Berger are absolutely right. I mean, where is the avant-garde? Where is the new? What is the new form of, quote, radical imagination? Or where does the avant-garde go at this point? You know, where is it? And this may be the first generation post 68 without an avant-garde and without a future in some ways. You know, we have to think about this too. You know, what does that future look like without the paving of the way? At least there were avant-gardes, you know, since Hegel, you've had avant-gardes. You have the Schlegel brothers, of course, you know, the musical avant-garde, of course, you know, the avant-garde around psychoanalysis, you know, the communists, etc., that repeated in certain periods, you know, in the theatrical world, from the theater of the absurd to the living theater to the, you know, the theater of cruelty, the poor theater, etc., etc. But we don't have these new forms, and I don't know the dance world that well, but I don't know if it's gone beyond, you know, some of the forms. Yeah, please, yeah, Andrew, yeah. You have to unmute, though. Yeah, you have to unmute. You're muted.
All right, yeah, so this is a question that is...
Pressing unmute.
Am I there?
You're good.
You hear me?
Yes, you're here now.
All right. Yeah, the question of, you know, where is the avant-garde? I mean, I think people are speaking to this ability to co-opt and commodify revolutionary practices, let's just say broadly. I think there's my sense is there's a kind of impossibility of an avant-garde, in the sense that anyone who's really kind of swimming upstream, going against the grain in terms of artistic practice, is going to be rendered invisible.
Mm.
And kind of the extreme phase of the whole neoliberal project of really taking resources away from, I want to say, true aesthetic practices, true practices of inquiry. It's not that I don't think that they don't exist. I just think, I think there's no space. I think there's no room for certain practices to exist. I think they exist in atomized form, maybe all over the world, but there's no way for, let's say, groupings of, I don't know, revolutionary artistic constructs in the sense of the Russian avant-garde, in the sense of Malevich and people like that, and in the sense of the movement in dance, and I think it's a reflection of the moment. And I also think that the age of the artist as hero is over, and sort of beside the point, and sort of maybe the artist as hero is inappropriate to the time. I think, one thing that made great art movements or avant-gardes in retrospect is a certain kind of visibility and a certain kind of projection that these avant-gardes could eventually be appropriated, and now they're all in the museum, right?
Yeah.
So I have a sense that maybe avant-garde, and I want to hear what people think about this. And Michael, like you're saying, well, where are the avant-gardes? I want to say maybe the avant-garde in the old sense, that there's like a kind of a movement that can be gathered around and identified and named. Maybe that's not happening because that's actually not what's needed. There's a kind of, this concept of the artist as hero. I mean, it's all of these great revolutionaries are now making profit for the machine, right? So I feel like there's a kind of and I have questions about what Stiegler was talking about in terms of the role of the artist. And I just wonder if art as an idea or as a genre or some sense of like creative process needs to be coming out of a kind of privileged sphere, which the avant-gardes became. And I'm asking the question myself right now, and I want to hear what people think about this. Yeah. There's a kind of artistic practice, my sense is, that has to be reinvented beyond commodification. And I don't know what that looks like as in terms of objects in the world. I feel like maybe it's more a quality of mind and has to do with maybe a phenomenology of the everyday. I want to say that what, the question is, what are the practices that absolutely resist becoming commodified and absolutely resist being assimilated into the tertiary retention, if I understand what people are talking about when they speak to that?
I don't think we can avoid being assimilated into tertiary retention. But yeah, please, Arto, go ahead. I don't
it's
think
Andrew.
saying that, or that's at least vis-a-vis Stiegler, is not that we cannot avoid tertiary retention. That's really where the practice is in a lot of ways. We'll get to that with Dennis, I think, a little later today. And but go ahead, Arto. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No. I just want to maybe try to follow up on Andrew's kind of path of thinking, which was, I found, very kind of creatively thought-provoking, and because I'm kind of wrestling with this question too, sort of, is it possible that the impossibility of the avant-garde today is sort of the effect of the new totalitarianism of sort of this kind of digital subjectification and all the things that it entails, the computability, this kind of hyper positivism that has totally penetrated everyday life, and all the different ways through which people make sense of things. And I wonder if maybe indeed there's a need for a new ethic of the avant-garde, like not a new Protestant ethic, obviously, but a new ethic which projects a certain level of temporary immunity from it becoming digitized or like less calculable way of being, less calculable way of doing art, and in a very naive way for me personally, because I only started thinking about this recently, since I didn't do music for 15 years because I went to graduate school to study philosophy, but now 15 years later, and I did electronic music before then as well, but everything is sort of much more incorporated into the digital kind of domain in a certain simplistic positivist way that's geared for very easy sort of use by capital. And I was wondering, like, what would be this new ethic of the emergent avant-garde that resists sort of easy pollution by the tertiary apparatuses of sort of what we could call super modern capitalism. And I think one of the things that in music, at least, it could be sort of a deliberate reliance on doing things differently than the way. So in other words, there's a methodological opening for some kind of a project of negation, like do your music in ways that are not sort of commonly part of the everyday life of music production, for instance. But of course, as Andrew says, that would immediately result in marginalization
yes,
and
how do you live?
invisibility. And how do you live? But I think there's a need for a new ethic, whether it's going to be a new communist ethic, broadly defined communalist ethic, or a new analog ethic in the world, where I think Andrew talked about this last time about the body and sort of what is the body, and are we not asking those questions enough today? I mean, obviously you are and other people are, but maybe more people should be worrying and thinking about these things as artists or people in general.
If I might come back in, I just try to wrap my head around. I don't even know exactly where I was going, but Arto has been helpful. I just want to say, and this whole question of not understanding perhaps really in its subtlety tertiary retention. So I will leave that aside, but and maybe it's good that artistic practice is all assimilated into that. But I want to say that this question of the analog versus the digital, when I was speaking of kind of a phenomenological investigation of the everyday, what I was speaking to is, well, what happened to the unique offering that lives in time and space? Is that just to be put aside? I mean, and is there a context in which the object can retain how it lives in the world in real time and space? I mean, I look at Instagram and
good point.
And I can't. I mean, the revolt. I want to feel. Maybe I'm just sort of like old or old-fashioned, or I'm not getting with it. But I want to say the resistance to digitization may be very important somehow, and anything and everything, whether it's a sculpture, a performance, or a video, or a painting, can be just immediately sent out into Instagram. And I want to say, well, everything is completely decontextualized then.
Yeah.
And so maybe the impossibility of the avant-garde is really the opportunity. Well, if an avant-garde, if everything and everyone is so atomized in the creative spheres, you know, and oh, well, I can just put it on Instagram, you know, and have 1 million people see it instantaneously. There's something about a profound cheapening of the phenomenological encounter with the real, I want to say, and let's not, I don't want to get into that, defining that, but so I'm just curious, like, what is Stiegler then, if to bring it back, you know, if we have to, as you said, kind of go forward, we're not going backward, right? We're in this digitized universe, but isn't there a resistance that's necessary? And yeah, as Arto reminded me, you know, of well, how do we get back to the body? In other words, I mean,
Well, the problem is we're really inside the machine. This is his point in a certain way. We're already so much inside that we don't have, you know, that possibility to get out without this dynamic of the re-enchantment of the world, maybe something you're speaking to in a certain way. But again, it's not wishful thinking on his part. Again, he's unflinching in terms of what's going on. You know, and you bring up invisibility. I mean, one of the most, you know, active and you know, in some ways down there statements was from the Invisible Committee, right? From the group in France that actually put out something for insurrection, right? So these little pockets are happening. I mean, I don't know if they're totally avant-garde, but they don't want to hear the stale old language anymore. You know, this is coming from people in their 30s, you know, in their, you know, 20s and 30s. So this is something that, again, we would have to take into account. But I think, again, you raise a very good point. What do we do with this tertiary retention? And what do we do in terms of bringing back context, you know, to a completely decontextualized body, disembodied, decontextualized space that I think you're referring to, you know, in an actual way. Yeah, sorry, yeah, yeah. So, yeah.
Stiegler also, you know, presents the concept of trans individuation. So there's, you know, there's individuation, the process of de-individuation that, you know, takes place, but trans individuation seems to be, is it on it's a collective identification. It's a kind of, I don't know, interpsychic collective process whereby you connect to something beyond yourself that is unifying in some sense, culturally or politically, and that the loss of the possibility of trans individuation seems to be also something he's pointing to as a way to, I don't know, that, you know, the intense seeming individuation of this atomized, digitized kind of environment we've been talking about. What is lost is also the possibility of trans individuation. I'm not entirely sure I know exactly what he means by that, but I have some concept of it. But it could be, I mean, how is it different from, I don't know, kind of enlightenment project? Is it the same as the notion of an enlightenment project of, you know, emancipation and reason, or is it something else? Is it, you know, I'm not entirely sure.
Well, I mean, he does refer to in states of shock, you know, this reading for tonight, you know, not so much in the end where we're reading, but he does refer to maturity in a reading of What is the Enlightenment by Kant, which was a piece of excellent philosophical journalism of that time. That the real issue here is to be in a psychic collective individuation, you know, based again on the support of an economy of contributions. And we can get to those kind of alternatives as we go further. But again, the starting point seems to me to be the psychic individuation. You know, what is individuation for him today? You know, how does one, you know, again, resist this being inside the machine fully? How does one, you know, take that essential really step back, right? To see the revealing power, if you will, or the unconcealment, to use Heideggerian language, of the power of the technological, right? How does one ultimately see this? So I think this is where he's really trying to go, as we go forward, right? Again, with this unflinching, I mean, again, I don't find any nostalgia here to the good old days of the 60s or the 70s, or really that to 2010, right? So,
So I,
yeah, please,
uh,
yes, Dr. York, or, okay, yeah,
thank you.
yeah,
I'm so grateful for you bringing us back to that passage about support and substance instead of means. And this, I'm so grateful to this because of my work with Cora in Kristeva and Derrida
yes,
as the milieu, right,
yes,
that Marx precisely overlooks, the milieu of support that is the body, that is the mother's body,
right,
and the infant's body together, that are the milieu that form the means of life and the earliest techniques.
right,
So
yeah,
the sense of indistinction or indifferentiation that is necessary to be accepted before individuation is, in a sense, I think, the answer to the question you just raised about this trans individuation. So if we can properly be consumers of our milieu, then and appreciate the supportive nature of the substances of the body and the immediate environments, and learn enough tolerance about distance, separation, etc. Those very early things, of course, I'm interested in. Then we won't have to jump over our problem of dependence. We won't have to kill the mother or the place or the environment or the body in order to escape into a fantasy of non-existence, as an independent individual without any supports or dependence, right? This fantasy of digitization that's atomized. My sense, so I finished, this was my dissertation project actually, is thinking about digitization in this aspect of milieu, because my sense is that actually we are not so much escaping through atomization as we are immersing ourselves in a sense of anonymous, decentralized, unlocated, quasi-benevolent, the milieu, right? The internet, my followers, whoever is seeing or not seeing this, they are my support. So there's a sense of the regression to unresolved controversies about work independence that we're enacting now in our digital milieu, that is not so much about individuation, and it's not so much about being able to be together in a phenomenal way. And so when we're asking about what will we do to get out of the machine, well, the first machine is the mother, right? The first machine is this push me, pull you situation where my substance and my hand, the substance in my hand, the tool in my hand is a part of my hand. And there's actually, I think, a return to that situation. Pre-differentiation could be a way to get the artist to re-individuate, I guess, with new digital substance. It seems possible, I believe, actually, that when we allow ourselves to regress, we can do so in a creative way again. Instead of toward paranoia, I think we can go toward dependence in a healthy way.
Okay, I mean, I hear a lot of echoes of Margaret Mahler here in terms of the separation, individuation in the beginning, and of course the receptacle that you refer to, the Cora, right, and Kristeva and Derrida, as being very very essential. I mean, I'm always reminded, unfortunately, of another kind of retention that goes on through the system, that how capital, plays upon this. If you remember their commercials for E-Trade with the baby in a crib with the phone, right? Who's trading securities, right? And this is the substitute breast, if you will, and the mother says, put that thing away, right? Separate from it. And then as the mother leaves the room, he picks up the phone again, the baby, the toddler. So, I mean, this may be an image, right, in part of the problem we have, because, there's an addiction, an addictive economy going on here, as well as the attention economy that may be far outside just the old separation, individuation complex, that the system is all too ready to again throw these objects at us. This is part again of what he's talking about, this incessant digitization and being written by technics, in some ways. Yeah. So I'm not trying to argue. I'm just saying that this seems to be again another part of the social that is working here with the psychic individuation. The kids are socialized very early here neurologically to attach themselves to electronic objects, to pick it up, and this becomes substitutes for the real, as Andrew was talking about earlier. But just my immediate reflection.
Yes, exactly. But that's I guess that's what I'm trying to say, right?
Okay.
We're regressing in this way because this is exactly how capitalism works, right? It works to make us toddlers who won't ever walk away.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think you have a great point that we have been in a process that Stiegler does not really talk about in in this book so much. He talks about later. We've been infantilized, right? You see this faculty in universities. You can see this in almost every field, the infantilization. The politics, the serious politics is pitched to an 8th grade mind, right? 7th grade mind. The reading ability of students coming to university on a 1990s level is 8th grade, probably 5th grade on a 1970s level. So we're really in this very, very deep shift, that is, that we, it's very hard to punch your way out of it. And at the same time, to understand it is not enough. I mean, again, going back to what Andrew said about the body, how do you create the place? I like the word place, topos, better than space, to have this new creativity, this new avant-garde, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, where people can engage, as you were suggesting, Lydia, this economy of contribution in this regressive moment. How do we get to that? This is part of his thing. He'll respond to the Tina syndrome with the Tola moment. There are lots of alternatives. Well, the question is, where do we begin? How does this happen? As we go forward. So, Richard, you wanted to say something?
Well, that you could also say, though, that the avant-garde hasn't died, but it's been so incredibly successful. I mean, in other words, that we've all become authors. And in terms of place, in that sense, what's interesting is, of place or Cora, or is movements like Occupy, it was very interesting the way Occupy Wall Street, and also the Arab Spring, the uprising in Istanbul, where there's a particular place, they're tied to a place. And then you have the use of digital or social media that then, take Occupy Wall Street, I forget the name of the square, but, it was a very...
Zuccotti.
Yeah, Zuccotti, very small. But, once you got everyone with their cell phones able to transmit, it became a very powerful, so it wasn't just, what's interesting is at times, and we can even see this with Black Lives Matter, the cities where these murders have taken place, but, that there's a critical way, a strategic way of reclaiming physical space in relation, and then using this, the fact that everyone is carrying a video camera these days. It's very interesting, I mean, because in a very kind of commercial way, you see if you look at Apple ads, you too are an author, you too are a filmmaker, you can be your own Godard or whatever. And it's totally fake and commercial, but it can be politicized. It can be, reappropriated, the use of these video cameras, as we've seen. And again, this use of place is very interesting in terms of a strategic reappropriation of this. And I'll just one thing in passing, and then I'll.
Yeah.
But Prometheus, pro there, and avant-garde, Prometheus, to think before, and then Epimetheus, or afterthought, or critical, and the relation of a kind of a new critical thought. I mean, sometimes I think some critical thinkers are kind of avant-garde, but anyway, the sense of place, I think, it makes a very interesting return at times.
But I just want to jump on this. I think this point about the everybody can be a filmmaker, and the Apple ads, and it's true that there's a certain democratization, if we want to use that word, of sort of everybody can have access to video making equipment or audio making, and which is good in the sense that everybody can be a musician. But there's the immediate corresponding also decline of craft. So for example, I was reading this interview by some of these great drummers from the 1990s, sort of West Coast grunge punk field. And a lot of them were complaining that people can't really play their instruments very well anymore, like the new bands. And they're saying there are no guitar solos anymore, or the drummers can't keep time. And of course, if we want to stay in the musical analogy, punk bands didn't know how to play their instruments often, but a lot of them really were virtuosos, right? And of course, you need to have a certain basic craft in order to be able to do anything at a certain level that will resonate. So whether it's music or dance or writing or teaching. So the proletarianization that I think Stiegler talks about, the loss of knowing how to do, and is I think the fundamental problem, which is expressed through the supposed democratization of the notion anybody can be a filmmaker. Like, no, because 99.9% of the videos on Instagram they're videos, that's true, but they are essentially, I don't know what the word is or what words I want to describe them with, but it's a complicated kind of pharmacological object that the atomization of Instagram videos contributes to the general lack of meaning that Instagram conveys, minus the occasional interesting pieces that capture some important, significant moment, right? So I think the loss of craft, which is replaced by immediate and general availability of tools without craft. You have a hammer, but you don't know how to use it.
Exactly.
That's a huge problem. I think that's the symptom of proletarianization, loss of meaning and loss of knowing, which creates a new totalitarianism, a total dependency upon those who have a little bit of skill, and so to speak, that then can function as a replacement for your lack of skill.
I just wanted to mention, apropos that one of the great Heideggerian metaphors of our time is the broken hammer, right? We no longer have the hammer as such; it's the broken hammer. This is the Epimethean fault in a certain way, the default itself. And this is what, again, Heidegger maybe somewhat nostalgically bemoans this fact, whereas Walter Benjamin does not in the work of Art in the Age of technical reproduction, that bemoans the loss of craft and this kind of proletarianization, Whereas in Benjamin's case, there's a revolutionary potential, going back to what Richard was saying. So this is part of a very larger argument about the democratization of the man with a movie camera on the one hand versus that of, the perfection and the ability with the craft. Are we, in film, do we want to produce Eisensteins, right? Or do we want, some kind of technical expertise that reproduces itself and can, do great things? Or do we need both in a sense, right? Is this really what's happening? How do we walk that line, into the future? Seems to be. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew, and then I'm going to turn it over since it's getting.
Yeah, just quickly,
Please.
I want to say, relative to all this, and the question of, craft, and I don't know, when I think of craft, yeah, I think the way Erto is speaking, I think of, again, body. And I think it's interesting that all of a sudden, bodies got in the street. And all of a sudden, after 150 years, monuments came down. I mean, not that there wasn't not that there weren't, obviously, there was a huge history of protestation and an accumulation of a lot of elements coming together, but bodies got in the street. They were not at home on their computers. They were not at home absorbed in the digital sphere. They were on the street, they were in space. And I'm interested, Michael, in your distinction when I said, well, when I talked about space, I was talking about, bodies are not in space anymore. And maybe that's parallel to what you're saying about, when you said, I prefer place. Yeah, it's interesting. Places, it seems like it's a more local construct, like a real locality with buildings.
In a certain way at this.
Oh, I'm not getting you.
In a way, if you think close, I'm sorry, my connection's bad. Yeah.
Yes, I missed that. So the question, yeah. So
sorry. Yeah, yeah.
So it's
I
the
was saying
body.
topos is. Yeah. Go ahead.
I want to just say, well, the importance of the body in space and the implications of being a body in space or being a body in a place in relation to other places that has to traverse, that has biological limitations. There's something about that that's really important, I think. And something happened, people got out in the street and something actually happened. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like there's an important kind of resistance. It's interesting how the social media is utilizable, right, for resistance. Also, there's this double-edged sword. But I do think there's something about the assertion of the limitations of body that might be critical. I don't know what Stiegler would say about that. Would he say that that's nostalgic, or?
Yeah, I don't. We'll try to get to that later. I mean, that's a very complicated. The body is not really, part of his thing. I mean, he'll speak of libidinal economy as part of body, but he doesn't really speak of body per se, as some people do. Yeah. That's. So we can revisit that. I think that's a complicated question in his general ontology. But again, the ontology is that the technics is also shaping the body
Yes.
again.
Yes. Right.
The
Right.
inscription, the body is being written once again, right? This is it. He'll use, I don't know if you know Derrida's the great thing about we are all savages inscribed. He takes this from Flaubert. We are tattooed savages in some ways. And this is a phrase that Stiegler could really work in terms of this grammatization that he speaks about, how we are, basically written, inscribed subjects in history. So anyway, I'm gonna, just for a matter of time, and we can, continue much later than 8 o'clock. I mean, I'm fine with that. But anyway, I'm gonna pass it over to Dennis Broer, a very old and dear friend of mine, who most recent book that, at least in terms of intellectual inquiry, is now writing novels from Paris, and is The Birth of the Binge, on the seriality of TV. And those of you interested in this subject in a more deeper way, we did an interview with him on a show we do called Prosperity Marxism, an hour-long interview on his book and on digitalization, and some very interesting remarks vis-a-vis Stiegler, among others. And as we go forward, so I'm going to let him speak to both his book and tertiary retention and Stiegler's importance for both film studies, media studies. Dennis and I have had a long discussion about Althusser and ideological state apparatuses, and Dennis feels that media is the fourth of the ideological state apparatuses. And the more we get into this, it might be true, but it may be media as educators, since the educational institutions have become as being that of educators in a lot of ways. And Dr. Dennis does his thing on this last chapter of States of Shock. So Dennis, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you for joining us. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, this is the book, Birth of the Binge, Serial TV, and the End of Leisure. That's what it's called. And it's about, addiction and contemporary media, but a lot about a lot of different things, but that's one of the things it's about. I wanted to just start by just talking just a little bit about Stiegler. Well, I just taught television, just to say a bit about me, I taught television studies at the Sorbonne and at LIU in Brooklyn. And Stiegler, as European intellectual, and especially French intellectual, as he says in the essay we read, he grew up in a working class district outside of Paris. He was jailed for armed robbery, where he first studied and became radicalized, a la Malcolm X, but actually perhaps more of the Black intellectual and master novelist Chester Himes, also loved in France. Then he was taken on by Derrida. Became very prolific. His first major philosophical work, Technique and Time, 3 volumes, which is something that French intellectuals always do. The first thing is this really sort of, is their major theoretical work. And it was really technology in time is what you might really say. And then he became a public intellectual, which is something we don't have so much here, but he's very out there. Symbolic Misery was an attempt to understand the Popular Front, Holacracy Against Democracy, about television itself. And he's associated with a group called Ars Industrialis and the Beaubourg or the Pompidou. And a public intellectual very much out and commenting on society, like Badiou and Thomas Piketty here. And what we don't have in public very much, we do have, sort of Cornel West, Stanley Aronowitz, Jameson, maybe Michael Parenti, but not so much. But in France, it's really sort of a long tradition. Also, I just wanted to say that Stiegler is being much more acknowledged. Duke just hired 2 Stieglerians, actually, Jameson and Jameson liked my book and read it and said, this is a book that sort of shows how Stiegler actually can be used in terms of media criticism. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. So tertiary retention, which we already talked about, and I think we've sort of given a definition. There's a sort of, he talks about hyperinflating tertiary retention, about Husserl's understanding of perception as primary retention, as sense perception, and secondary retention, the filtering of that sensation through immediate memory. And he gives the example of the single note in music leading, being the primary retention, and then melody being the secondary. These longer term memories, though, are constructed outside immediate perception and separate from both experiential memory and from species memory. This external memory of a past that we ourselves have not lived is delivered to us through culture. These memories outside ourselves. Now, so I just want to talk a little bit about how that might be used. And I want to talk about tertiary retention in Disney. Disney is the company that thinks in terms of implanting memories with what Lacan calls the imaginary. That is, they're warm and fuzzy. You can sort of think about St. Ignatius of Loyola, sort of writ large. His thing of give me the kid until he or she is 7 and I'll have them for life, So if you think back on our histories, we all have Disney implanted in them. I think of Old Yeller from my generation, watching Old Yeller at the drive-in. You know, they're really going to kill that dog, you know. And then earlier we have Snow White, Dumbo, Pinocchio, an earlier generation, later The Little Mermaid. But the company is built around securing generations, not a single viewer or view. And implanting these warm and fuzzy memories that are not ours, and that are mainly about perpetuating a brand or singeing consciousness with a branding iron, you know. Or you can think of more contemporary, the warm and fuzzy around Google and its changing logo every day. It's the service you want from your searches and the display we're all used to, despite the fact that while you're searching Google, Google is searching you and mining your data. Or what I just wrote about Perry Mason, you know, I just wrote about dum, you know, and everybody knows dum as the opening of Perry Mason, or Dragnet's dum, dum, dum. This is auditory tertiary retention. Images are sounds that are not ours, yet are still implanted. So the next thing is how tertiary retention works in terms of time. In conjunction, you know, there's a synchronization of these implanted images over duration, which tends to reinforce it. So television, particularly, is uniquely in the business of selling time. That is, networks sell advertising time to sponsors, guaranteeing the delivery of a manufactured audience and a synchronization of consciousness, which is something that Stiegler talks about. The product they sell is indeed the audience they produce. Although now they don't only sell the audience, now they sell the audience's very consciousness. That's the move from old form of sort of Fordist television to the streaming services, which is happening in a big way right now. In fact, I'm working on a book and it's called Diary of a Digital Plague Year, Coronavirus, Serial TV, and the rise of the streaming services. This extended synchronization taking place across digital media as a whole is now affecting a change in time in an attempt to overlap the two concepts of time as envisioned by Bergson. That is, the media industry's attempt to convert pure time or duration or actual time, which is also the time of reflection, into mathematical time, divisible into units or intervals, or what Stiegler calls the calculable. You know, and he makes this distinction between what he calls the behemoth of telecrity, the mediatic synchronization of time and subjectivity, and what he wants to call the televisual, which contains the potential for restoring the more social elements of duration and reflection to the machinic domination of regulated time. And he talks about how capital, of course, has always attempted to control the rhythms of time and to submit it, to domesticate time, as Leroy Gorham says. The result of this domestication is an entirely synchronized society and a liquidation of the social. In this attempt to align duration with mathematical time and eliminate the time of reflection. And the main point around time, particularly around television, is that so much time is spent watching television or tuned into our screens and reinforces and makes more real what is not real, which is tertiary retention. You know, what Raymond Williams called the flow of television. You know, is now an attempt to colonize time, so that under Stiegler's telecritique, the continual television flow is also the time of the market. Under hyperindustrialization, the time of consciousness becomes the 24/7 of the meta markets, where the natural system of the seasons as well as the time of memory is submitted and synchronized to the global system of the production of consumer goods and financial products. So memories, these temporary and temporal industrial objects, are part of now a global network, you know, in a way that the Hollywood Dream Factory could only dream about, you know, expand into all forms of sort of cultural production. There was a thing during the coronavirus, the French television viewing went from 3.5 to 4 hours a day. So, you know, so this just expansion to duration in terms of time reinforces the falseness of the tertiary retention, because now we really are spending the time that's needed to sort of seal this kind of the realness of this. And it's also part of serial TV and binging that integrates with shopping, gaming, working, blogging, downloading, texting, all part of this 24/7, as Matthew calls it, which results in annihilation of the singularity of the place and the event. Now, the third part I just want to talk about for a few minutes, the idea of the technological history of this new dominance, which Stiegler is very good about. With the advent of recording devices in the 19th and the 20th centuries, including the photograph and recorded music, the potential for the sedentary processes left by the production of tertiary retention to influence, in fact, to create memories increased. So there's a huge leap when we move to the moment of recording devices. That's a huge leap for him. Then there's another leap, which takes a huge leap between the advent of the analogical processes. And then finally, where these technologies of memory have gone from being techniques of transmitting knowledges to being an increasingly important part of the industrial economy. So what was techniques of memory has now, in the current, with the digitalization, with the moment of digitalization, which really sort of begins to be heightened at the early 80s, which is also the moment of neoliberalism, which is also the beginning moment of serial TV. Now they're much more importantly integrated into the economy of capital, integrally submitted to the imperatives of globalization and the mechanics of work. Consciousness itself, is about the control of these memory-making devices and was subsumed by capitalist investment. And consciousness came to be seen as the object of systematic exploitation after World War II, but then, as I said, a huge leap in the 80s with the digital and the idea of digital recording. And of course the idea too that's so crucial in Stiegler, the idea of hyperindustrialism, signified this new digital era is primarily neither a postmodern information economy nor a post-industrial age. The factory system, which in part defined modernity, has not been exceeded, but rather intensified. So this continuation of the industrial age into the virtual world is driven by capital and involves the industrialization of all things, the domination of nature by the technique. But and again, this moment of the early 80s of neoliberalism, of also the beginning of financialization, of the dominance of financialization, so a symbolic economy, an unreal economy, an irreal economy, and at the same time, as I said, neoliberalism, the digital age, and that is the moment of serial TV. That's when you can date it from there, from that moment of Hill Street Blues, which was kind of the beginning of this. There's intensification of this sort of mental fracking or assault on everyday life, begun in the period of Reagan and Thatcher, the counter-revolution of the 80s with the rise of the personal computer and the dismantling of the system of social protection. Just to sort of talk about where we are now around that, this, neoliberalism and financialization, but just the financialization, how the three acted together, where we are around the financialization now, which has reached a period also of sort of utterly symbolic. In April 2020, with the country's economy in large part shut down, the value of stock on Wall Street increased by 15%. In 2019, the financial sector of the global economy was valued at $87 billion, a tenfold increase over the value of the real economy in the last decade. And of course, you can see it. We recently saw it. The example of the two bankrupt companies, Hertz and JCPenney. After filing for bankruptcy, they saw their stock prices increase by respectively 1,500 and 500%. One Wall Street investor said, "The one thing I've learned is that right now in the stock market, a company's health does not correlate with the stock price one bit." So we really have, sort of in this sense, moved to this sort of symbolic economy, to this, which digitalization, implanting of memory, and hyperindustrialism is part of. Okay. Now, what I want to do, I just want to show something, which is, we've just had a really interesting discussion about, well, where's the avant-garde and all this? How does that fit? Or does it fit around it? And my feeling is that Stiegler, you do have to come back to the Pharmacon. that we are in the middle of this thing. And what's happened is the generational absorption of avant-gardes and of the idea of the avant-gardes. That space which was so important in the 19th century, which Flaubert talked about, and which Bourdieu described, of autonomy, is gone. It's just gone. It's gone with the real sort of commercialization of the arts and the addition of the arts to and becoming a motor of capital. Also, within what's been absorbed is what might be called the materials memory of all of that, and that exists. So what I want to do is actually, oddly enough, I want to show 1 minute of this show called Dollhouse by Josh Whedon, because Josh Whedon is right in the center of all this. And Dollhouse, the character Dollhouse Echo, this was a show from about, I think, 2012. Echo is a character who was initially a radical ecologist, and she got caught, with burning trees, and her memory got erased by this company, Rossum. Rossum is the ultimate Stieglerian nightmare, of hyperindustrialization of memory. That's its product, the hyperindustrialization of memory. So what happens with Echo, though, is she gets all these sort of different personalities imprinted on her. So she's got 36 different personalities. But what happens in the end of the thing, this is near the end, this little minute that I want to show, is that she doesn't reject the 36 personalities and return to this pristine moment of when she was an echo, an echo revolutionary. She absorbs the 36 personalities, and these help her to bring down Rossum. And that, to me, seems like exactly what Stiegler is talking about. So let me share the screen. Okay, can I do that? Am I?
If Matt is here, he'll have to put you as a host, right?
Yeah, I think so, because I have to share. I need to share the screen.
Yeah.
You should be able to share it if you scroll across the bottom, and there should be a green.
Yes. Okay, so I'm pressing that. Now, am I sharing the screen? Let's see, because let me go to this thing and see if that. Okay, can you see what I put up here? Can you see what I put up? You should see the dollhouse. What? No, then something's not working. So the screen's not being shared. So
No, wait. It's sharing.
It's sharing.
Okay.
Now.
I think it's just slow.
Okay.
It's sharing.
Okay,
though.
so I'm going to play 1 minute from Dollhouse. So here's your 1 minute from Dollhouse.
These are the 36 personalities.
Yes, this is Echo's 36 personalities. Yeah. Oh, I hope I can get this. Okay, let's see.
It says we're viewing Michael Pelias' screen. I don't know if that's correct.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Can you see it?
On my
Right.
screen. It's got to go to Dennis's. Yeah.
So try to share now.
Oh, wait. Okay, sorry. Okay, is it sharing now or not?
No. Hold on.
Well, okay, what's going on? How come it's
I think you have to click on the green share screen, and then you have to double click on the window of,
oh,
of
say
your video.
share. I see where it says share. Okay, if you got it now?
Yeah. Now you're sharing.
Screen sharing.
Good.
So there it is.
Okay.
There's the figure.
Okay. All right, so good. So here we go.
There's no sound though.
Yeah, I can hear the sound of the
We don't
video.
have sound, Dennis. We don't have sound. We're not getting sound. Somehow it's
Any
corrupted.
sound?
No, I think the video is slowing the connection, so it's sort of just freezing
Yeah.
and it's not really coming through. Because it sounds sort of like jumbled.
So you couldn't hear the sound or what?
No, we can't hear the sound, and it's jumbled when there is a little bit of sound.
Okay,
All we're getting is the visual
okay. I'll just summarize it then.
images, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. It's too bad. So I'll just summarize it then. Let me just get back to the screen here. Sorry. Okay. Okay, let me just turn off the share screen. Did I do that?
Yes, we're back. We're back. We're good.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Echo says. Echo says, I'm a people person. And that's a joke because she's 36 people. And then he says, you're 36 people and you can't cook. And she says, well, you can't cook either. And then they start talking about some of her personalities, and she starts talking about this mission of what they're trying to do and how they're trying to integrate it. And I think the important thing in terms of the Farmicon here, this is a really good illustration of the Farmicon, because she really does not go back. She needs, in attempting, in being able to destroy Rossum, which is what they do eventually in the show. By the way, what really destroys Echo is Fox TV, which couldn't stand the show, actually. They're famous for commissioning shows that they think are sort of out there, and then when they're further beyond Fox TV, well, I call Fox the network where all good shows go to die. But anyway, so in order to defeat Rossum, she does need to use all 36 personalities, and underneath is the Echo revolutionary, but she does not return to that, and that's an important part of the series. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, maybe we can, ask if you have any questions for Dennis, this use of Stiegler for media studies, as well as this explanation of, time flow in terms of duration and how capital is so adept at using this, maybe how that could be confronted, because again, look, it's all about time. I mean, to put it mildly, right? And we recapture, if you will, whether it's through the body, through the mind, through both the unity of consciousness. Really, in a certain way, the struggle here, to me, is really the struggle for consciousness, understanding, and then to be able to, get into what he says, or what he advocates for is transformative activity, very much like Marx in the 11th thesis on Feuerbach. So anyway, so any thoughts about this? I mean, I know we had an exchange about infantilization and domestication of time on the chat, and we came up to the new avant-garde is the baby wars, that Biden will be the sleeping baby, and Trump will be the baby enraged. So this is what we're faced with in our presidential campaign, the baby wars. So maybe we can start a movement on baby wars and politics, etc. And so anyway, all to say, any thoughts about this? What Dennis did? I know the book goes much more into depth about this and how one would look at seriality, which is a term that's used both from, of course, avant-garde music, vis-a-vis Berg and Schoenberg and Webern, and also Jean-Paul Sartre, serial thinking, you know, is another aspect of the positivism that Arto referred to before he left us to go to dinner. So, anybody, any comments or thoughts about this? Yeah, and this used. Yeah,
Only the comment that,
yeah,
you know, in Stiegler's kind of identifying the television and the televisual and the television screen, it's making me wonder about the telephone, the cell phone, you know, which is a handheld device and a much smaller screen. I'm wondering about just the sort of techniques of the cell phone and the way in which that is creating certain kinds of identifications and positionalities in this larger sort of ecology of new media, if you want to call it that. So I'm just wondering about the potential difference between the cell phone and the television, and maybe the way in which the cell phone has been used to create some kind of trans-individuation or some kind of collective will or some kind of cross, you know, temporal and spatial connection. And if we think about, you know, recent revolutionary struggles of liberation movements, Arab Spring, Hong Kong, wherever it might be, and they all have different forms and they're rooted differently and work for different things. But it seems like in that, the technology of the cell phone is very central to perhaps a new generation of revolutionary praxis. And is the cell phone going to function the same way as perhaps other technologies? And I don't know, does it have a liberatory potential?
you want to take that, Dennis? Yeah, please.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to speak to the liberatory potential. I just want to speak to the absorption potential, but their liberatory potential is that's what you spoke to that, and I think well and eloquently. But just that Quibi, QUIBI, is this new thing, you know, from the studios, and Quibi attempts to sort of capture the idea of what might be possible on the telephone. Quibi stands for Quick Bites, and it's only available on the portable, on the mobile. So, and everything you watch on the small screen, and Quibi has this whole thing about you can watch it either horizontally or vertically, and that's a big part of what they're what they're promoting. And it's 7 to 10 quick bits of supposed entertainment. Although actually, to tell you the truth, it also sort of absorbs all of the other sort of, in a way, some kind of wrong-headed, and some things that Stiegler talks about. But let me say also, they call it a lock key technology. And the first thing that happened was they're being sued because they brought an engineer from another company in to show them, what they were doing, and they probably stole the technology. So right now they're being sued.
Astonished to learn, yes, as Freud would say.
What?
Yeah.
What?
I was astonished to learn that this was stolen. You know, is kind of the message.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, but there's an attempt. There's a Stieglerian attempt to sort of, there's a hyperindustrialization of the potential, sort of resistant, possibility of the phone. However, it may not be working. Quibi's not doing well. There's also in Quibi, there's a class sort of distinction around Quibi that has come to the fore in sort of the coronavirus. That is, essential workers who are out in the world, they're left with Quibi, these crappy 7 to 10 minutes of not much entertainment at all. Whereas the middle class and upper middle class stays home, works on their screens, and they get to watch Apple TV, which is going to be the new HBO, because HBO Max is now trying for sort of a, kind of max audience. And that's where they got their marching orders from AT&T. So there's a class distinction, in terms of the crap on Quibi which is what, what essential workers are supposed to be, relegated to anyway.
Right. I think Matt Benetti and John both put good comments in the chat. One is that the cell phone is the key of tracking us.
Right.
Obviously, a new form of high surveillance capitalism, and he adds inextricably linked to extraction. And then, of course, then John part about doesn't the digital part of the military industrial digital complex? Well, yes, of course. I mean, it's being used constantly that way too.
Yeah, and also what I forgot to say, the other really crucial book about understanding contemporary media is Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. It's also part of surveillance capitalism. It's a big part of it. All of the moves of the streaming of the studios and the television stations now to streaming is so that they can take advantage of the new digitization and of the new sort of surveillance capital, so that they can survey and monetize their audiences. So TV is watching you while you're watching TV now as well. That's the whole idea. That's the whole idea. That's why they're all so eager to get online. It's a new revenue stream.
I think we ought to hold your question, Hugo. It's a very rich and dense question. Is the cell phone as part of technics, right, in terms of this object, is remedy and poison. I mean, I was sent something on Instagram about a group of black ex-military people in Cato Parish, Louisiana, which is Shreveport near Dallas. And this is a very militant black area traditionally. And they actually got out and said, we have weapons. They showed them. It's an open carry state. And if the Confederate, the new sons of the Confederacy come messing with our women again, they're going to pay the price. And they got out there. This was gone, but this has not made the major news. But I'm reminded tertiarily of the Bogalusa, lunch counter, the Deacons of Defense, which helped start the Black Freedom Movement. Also, Negroes with Guns. Robert Williams in the Carolinas. So this is kind of interesting that this is being hidden. I forgot his name. I think it's Derek or something. He was out there on Instagram for 6.5 minutes talking about we're protecting ourselves. We're peaceful people, but we're protecting ourselves. These people come in here and tell us that, disrespect our women, disrespect our, sisters and our brothers, and they come in flashing their weapons. Well, we're going to show them, we have weapons too. And, believe it or not, of course you believe it, the motorcycle gang, this white supremacist gang, backed off. So this is interesting in terms of, and 300 people showed up for this quote showdown. It's very interesting. It's on Instagram. You can probably Google it. But this is something that is not going to make Rachel Maddow or MSNBC tonight, and may be used, ironically, may be used as Fox News to mobilize the white, the white supremacists in a certain way. Oh, they're armed too, or something like that. So I mean, again, this whole thing of poison and remedy, and then what's put out there is another story. But some of us are old enough and know enough about this to know that we are in this lurch now, that the question of violence is always pushed down. This is very interesting to kind of think about why are these questions being relegated to the ash can of history. It's part of a different period of black power struggles, etc. So it's interesting that there are these armed groups out there at this point, and we're all part of this unfinished civil war. So I mean that again is how tertiary memory is not going to hit the general media in some ways. Yeah. So Anyway, some other some comments here. Any I mean, it's a very good question about the cell phone. Does this have any kind of potential, these objects, except to track you? Where are you? right? What time, in a sense. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, in a sense. I mean, the celluloid had tremendous revolutionary potential in the Soviet debates in the 1920s. It was talked about as a, man with a movie camera, Eisenstein's theoretical mix, the other stuff that went on in German expressionism and that, Deleuze's wonderful way. I remember I taught a course on the dialectic in the United States was done through Griffith, not through, Eisenstein. Birth of a Nation was our dialectic, which would be certainly worthy of revisiting right now as an educational moment in terms of monuments and monumental history. So,
or intolerance. Intolerance is a much,
tolerance even better. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's really the dialectic.
tolerance too. Yeah,
And Eisenstein saw it too, and
yeah,
he, and
I
he
was very
validated it.
taken by both of yes, exactly, and wrote on it. So yeah, I mean, this raises again the question that we need to do. I mean, I don't know about the Black Lives Movement. I'm not so sure it's not rooted in identity politics. Responding to the chat again, but again, a very good question. Does it exceed identity politics? So far, I haven't seen that. I know that that's part of the criticism, and the debate is going on between a friend of ours, Adolph Reed Jr., who wants to talk about class versus race and class race together rather than just the racial, moment of Black Lives Matter. And will this turn into another identity politics? I don't know, but yeah, again, another question. But yeah, yeah.
I want to
Please,
think
yeah.
bodily about the cell phone as inherently regressive because it's actually not, it's not grammatological. It's about it's the size of a hand, the size of a genital, the size of a tool, right? But it's
Right.
not actually a tool for anything other than touching.
Yes.
So I froze.
Yeah, we missed the last. Sorry.
Just talking about the mechanics, the bodily interface of the phone.
Right.
So the television and the computer monitor screen are analogous to a face.
Yes.
Size of a face. This is analogous to a hand or a genital, a hand and a genital or a tool, but it's used primarily in terms of touch. That's it's not typing, right? So it's not actually about a grammatological structure. It's visual, and the swiping aspect of it, I think, is primarily what's regressive. You get bells and whistles when you touch something instantly. So I think the answer is no. It's not going to be a revolutionary object, ultimately.
Yes. I happen to be in agreement with you very deeply as well. Yeah. And I'm not so sure. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
And it is really in the forefront of the surveillance economy. It really is the moment that really is one of that and what we're currently on, Zoom. Zoom is the absolute epitome of the surveillance economy, because as Shoshana Zuboff says, but so is the cell phone, but as Shoshana Zuboff says, for a long time, they could not match emotions with language, because sometimes when you say something, it's not what's on your face, and it kept confusing advertisers. With Zoom, it makes it possible to go over everything we're doing, including this thing, and to match emotions with language and to see how they're incongruent so advertisers can learn to speak to it.
Right.
We're engaging right now in one of the great experiments in surveillance capitalism.
Yes, and it's going to get more the more the discourse on defunding the police. It's going to be increasing day by day, because this is the new policing function, right? And it'll be a, the civil transition, if you will, to policing by phone, you know, et cetera. Yeah. And, new forms of infiltration. Again, kind of infantilization. Yeah. I liked taking from today, I thought there was a good concept that the presidential election is really about the avant-garde of baby wars. We have two moments of infantilization going on here, the rage and the sleeping, right? Tiredness, worn out, time to go to bed versus that of the rage of Trump. It's kind of interesting if you begin to think about how much we've been domesticated and infantilized in terms of the quote rational choice. I mean, I don't vote, but anyway, I'll vote for Howie Hawkins, but in the Green Party, but how infantilized we've done. Yeah. So yeah. This is very, very good, this baby wars. I like this. This could be a beginning of a new movement, a new dance troupe, if you will. The sleeping and enraged two infants going at each other in a way. And I can imagine what these debates are going to look like. I mean, it's very, very frightening, to put it mildly, again, but, we'll have to see if there's some, remedy in this poison too. And if there's a third way. I mean, that's again, is Stiegler crafting a third way, and Zizek, in another lesser way, in my opinion, but Zizek, Dean, Bruno Bastiles, and Badiou about resuscitating the idea of communism, the meaning of communism, etc. And there's a lot written around that and the communism of the internet, etc. But again, is there a third way here in the Stieglerian position of there are many alternatives? And where are we in this? Again, my admiration for him is not so much about only the alternatives, it's about his unflinching attempt to look at this in its face, right? This is to me his great contribution throughout this, and to see this temporally, and in a way very Marxist in the sense that he's doing a history, if you will, a temporality of technical evolution that is part of this tertiary retention. This is very important to keep in mind. Yeah, he's very, very interesting this way. He's maybe doing a kind of new technological morphology in some ways. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah. Anybody else? Some other thoughts? Or yeah, and thank you, Dennis. And I want to say Matt put me onto a link by, I don't know if you know Adam Curtis, who did Century of the Self in the 70s, which began with the Bernays moment in the United States and women's smoking, and his propaganda campaigns over the years. Wrote a book called Propaganda, and also the engineering, public relations. He's the first basically public relations expert. Freud's nephew, who helped Freud out of a financial crunch by getting, Brill to publish some of the works, etc. Anyway, they were at odds after that. But Curtis did a thing called on hypernormalization, which speaks to some of these things as well that we've been. Oh, it's dated. It's 2014. It's when it is, but it's Adam Curtis Hyper. Yeah, I think Matt just put it up. Hypernormalization, but yeah, I watched it. It's worth the hour and a half of viewing if you're not doing anything else. You want FaceTime, to put it that way, instead of hand time. So yeah, good. All right. So yeah, so this is what I'd like to do next week. I'd like to start with the thing on education, right? And then I'll go into some of his notions of libidinal economy, and maybe we'll go a little more into tertiary retention as well as part of the future, and what use value it may have for revolutionary purposes. I wrote a little something about, and I'll send this out, but I'll just read you a little bit because I think this is where Stiegler is going at one level phenomenologically, since we're using that term in terms of the reduction. Consciousness is the network of interconnected and multi-layered circuitry for Stiegler. And it ranges from the unconscious to the history of memory of culture itself. That's what tertiary retention is. Consciousness is not only dynamic, but it's also fundamentally transformative for Stiegler as circuitry. You know, in a certain way, he is talking about a kind of rewiring, if you will, right? In terms of mind. And it is what inscribes the psyche in the social through techniques. Also, how psychic life is immediately seized in a process of sublimation. This is another thing. This is Stiegler speaking. This is where the transformation takes place, where psychic life is immediately seized in the process of sublimation. So the psychic, the technics inscribes the psychic and the social, and it uses the tools of technics, right? And it privileges the technical in the retentional moment, and technics transforms our psychic life through sublimation, through a process of forgetting, and the fact of what is forgotten is precisely this transformation. So it's kind of interesting that he takes this Nietzschean dimension of the active forgetfulness is part of this process that gives us transformation. So the possibility of the chance of transformation is the framing and reframing of consciousness as a circuitry process, and he's trying to do a new ontology. This is really, I think, his contribution. This is why I think Dennis said, you know, the French want to give their multi-volume ontology as philosophers. This is what Stiegler is really trying to do, is found a new ontology. This is a, quote, an attempt at a foundational work, you know, and do we proceed from this? Is this the answer, if you will, for my purposes as a, practicing teacher of philosophy? Does this follow in the footsteps Deleuze's difference in repetition, which is an attempt towards this? Being an event, right? Logics of world, the immanence of things from Badiou, his 3 volumes, right? Are these transitional works, post Being and Time, if you will, if you look at Being and Time? And then, of course, for the leftist tradition, history and class consciousness as being, fundamental to thinking through categories of alienation, reification, objectification, and really being as time, right? And here Stiegler is trying to put out that we no longer are concerned with the problem of the forgetfulness of being. We're thinking about technics as time. So another thing he's trying to do, I think, is engage the phenomenological reduction, the eidetic reduction, how it said it's no longer that we are in a period of astonishment. He wants to use the term enchantment, and we'll get to that in terms of a movement, of a replacement of alienation, right? He wants to also get us to the point, Arto's no longer here, but I'll put this out later, deproletarianization. How do we become makers again in this, digital age, in this digital epoch? So again, the process of exteriorization is going on, but it's not only this recapturing of tertiary retention, it is a mnemotechnics that is really at stake. What is the techniques of memory? How is this to be used? I know Gerald Horne has a very good book. I think it's very worth reading, the 1776 book on, that the war for independence was really a justification of slavery here, because England was about ready to abolish slavery. Where did it come? The War of Independence was here to guarantee slaveholding for our great framers of the Constitution. So it's kind of interesting how one would use mnemotechnics in a different way, and this opens up a lot of new possibilities. So anyway, how do we?
Michael, I just want to say,
Yeah,
something.
sure. Yeah.
In terms of Gerald's book about 1776 and slaveholder mentality and the colonial settler mentality, it's very interesting to read that book and then watch Hamilton.
Yes, that's interesting. Yeah.
Which is whiteface.
Right. Right.
You know, and makes you awfully uncomfortable watching that.
It's out there. Think about why it's programming industries and tertiary retentions that you were speaking to. How do the programming industries control time? You know, it used to be you controlled the clock of the worker. Now it's the programming industries that are controlling time. This is part of this kind of proletarianization of the world.
Can I say just make 2 points?
Sure.
One thing you said about Deleuze, you know, that he really does quote and talk about a lot in that phrase, societies of control.
Yes.
And one of the things really is to talk about these new kinds of societies of control, to add on to Deleuze. What are these new societies of control and how do they work, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
One other thing I want to say is I have a quibble with Stiegler. I do not like using the term proletarianization.
Right.
That the proletarianization of the world means that everything is devalued. That is a direct hit on Lukács, and I don't agree with that terminology. And he grew up in a working class background, so I don't agree I don't accept. There's a few things I don't buy. I don't buy that the idea is deproletarianization of the world at all. I really don't accept that the turn of phrase of his, especially the negative connotation that he gives to, you know, what we're watching, you know, care workers, you know, all these people who are out, who really perhaps still are the ones who can sort of show us the way forward, but not understand
care workers,
that terminology.
Those who have been, you know, or proletarianized, right? I mean, he's not really speaking to that because he believes in an economy of care, and care workers would be part of the future therapeutics. I don't think he's really talking. I think he's talking about in his way, and I'm not again defending him against Lukács. I think he's trying to speak, or Marx for that matter. I think he's trying to speak to, you know, this kind of devaluing of the art of making. I think this is really where he's coming from. And
yes, I agree. I just don't like
live, right?
Yes, I just don't like calling it I just don't like calling it proletarianization.
Defabrication or something like that. Unmake, you know, a kind of unmaking. I understand this very well, but I think, you know, his no, I'm not referring, John, to Charles Taylor enchantment. No, Stiegler has a term of enchantment that we'll get back to. I was just responding to the chat here. Yeah. So what else, what was your other point? And I mean, look, the problem with Lukács to the French, as you know very well, Dennis, is that, you know, Lukács' notion of the proletariat as the agent of history has been sort of, you know, critiqued for a very long period here. That, you know, that you know, and it's not only the Althusserians, it's been a whole group of people in a way. And I'm not saying that, you know, I mean, yeah. And, you know, of course, this is an invented term by Marx, you know, to refer to a class. I mean, the proletariat didn't exist until Marx gave it currency. Yeah. So I'm not, yeah. But this is part of a French, you know, ongoing question here, right? Yeah. That you see.
Yes, it's true. It's true. And, you know, you think about this book, I just got Stasis Kovalaikis's book, and which is about the unhooking of the working class from leftist politics, which has been going on in French philosophy since the 60s. You know, I don't think that's necessarily a positive part of French politics.
No, it's true. But I mean, remember again, Stiegler comes out of that milieu, as you mentioned, you know, out of a working class family. He was a member of the party. He refers to in his little, you know, autobiographical, his memoir, where he says, you know, we were workers of the book, right? This was a kind of labor aristocracy. So it's interesting in a sense that, you know, he looks at this in terms of, I mean, maybe you could use this, and maybe he's speaking to the new service economy, speaking to advanced late capital, right? What has become the service economy. In the service economy, that no one really remembers how to make things, and maybe one could argue this from the position everything has been made in the outsourced area, and et cetera. That the making is taking place everywhere else. Yeah? So I mean, I'm just trying to, problematize it a little bit. But I agree with you. It's not a great term. Yeah. But this is what he thinks has happened, globally. And it's part of how we have become digitalized, and we have, again, the hand, the genitalia, everything here, how this is happening to us. How was this accomplished is really the question, I think, if there's a pushback, etc. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, but anyway, yeah. So, yeah, but you wanted to make another point too, and then we'll wrap it up and then we go on. Okay. So I think we can go back and like I said, the notion of the Enlightenment as well, he talks about maturity, and maybe I'll send out a little more reading on his educational thing. I mean, I read the section. Maybe I think, Matt, you sent the whole book, right? Maybe we can read, I think the
Of which?
States of Shock.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
it
the whole
might
book.
be interesting to read the first section called Pharmacology of Stupidity, Introduction to the Post-Structuralist Epoch. I mean, he's smart. I mean, look, I mean, again, maybe up to page 41, there's an argument with the Frankfurt School here. It's not only Lukács who's getting it, it's also the Frankfurt School. A lot of our icons are being, shot down here, from this Derridian, Stieglerian moment. But anyway, yeah. So maybe we could read, and I'll send this to Matt, and he can put it out. The chapter called Unreason, pages 15 to 41, alongside his educational practice at the end. Right? I think it's a very good introduction to his work. And again, he takes this from Naomi Klein's Disaster Capitalism, and our stuff, the shock doctrine. Disaster capitalism and the shock doctrine are really articulated by the Chicago School, and you can see two paths going on here. Foucault, who wrote The Birth of Biopolitics and the Biopolitic Tendency, that went with Roberto Esposito and Giorgio Agamben, who took this up very much from Foucault, and still stay in that moment of argumentation, as well as then the Naomi Klein more oriented thing that wants to examine disaster capitalism and show its ugly face and problematize it in a different way, which again I think speaks to his notion of to get outside of, look, I'll use his language in fairness to him, but I understand deproletarianization is not a great or that valuable of a term to use in everyday leftist practice. But but he does use it. He thinks that the art of going back to techne, poiesis, is really our future. And in this way, he's very much like Marx. The poetry of the future.
Just terms of the pharmacological, you said disaster, Naomi Klein's phrase, disaster capitalism. Now Zizek's new term is disaster communism.
Oh yeah, is he using? I thought he
used a new form that grows up out of the disaster. That's not related to the earlier one, but that is a new form of fellowship.
Well, Zizek's notion is pragmatic communism, right? He has this term of where he sees the bureaucracy as positive in some ways, in terms of its ability to act. And yeah, I've heard him talk about this, and I've talked to him about it. Anyway, okay, well, good. Okay, disaster babyism, great slogans. We got some great slogans tonight. We should I think use these as we can.